Watch right now on the Front News Project. Powerful explosions rock Crimea once again as the Ukrainian Armed Forces prepare to break through onto the peninsula. The war between Israel and Iran, a death sentence for the Russian Federation. Aludinov demands the mobilization of 1 million Russians. Putin has hidden aviation in the Far East. Ukrainian ballistic missiles are ready to destroy this target as well. Fiery, intense, and blazing footage from the front line to watch it right now. This is the 4th year of the full-scale war that Putin's Russia started on Ukrainian soil. The armed forces of Ukraine continue to heroically defend not only their homeland but the entire civilized world from the aggression of Kremlin war criminals. Greetings, this is Front News. Vladimir Timoshenko is here with you. For the next 30 minutes, you'll get the truth about the war, uncovered by our journalists from the hottest combat zones. So, are you ready? Then let's get started. And we're starting right away with exclusive material. Nighttime attacks on Russian territory and temporarily occupied Crimea are not letting up. Moreover, they are reaching a whole new level. We'll tell you in just a minute what was hit and where the strikes landed on the occupiers this time. Meanwhile, there have been new crucial statements from the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, and NATO has come up with a new way to monitor Russia from orbit. All these topics, as well as the new escalation in the war between Israel and Iran, are coming up next in our report.
It was a restless night for Russians in occupied Crimea. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, 125 UAVs were shot down overnight over Russia and annexed Crimea. On social media, it was noted that, according to preliminary reports, the drones allegedly reached the airfields of Saki, Havardiski and Kirovsky. But is that really the case?
The Russian Federation is also taking measures to camouflage, hiding things as much as possible, and with satellite images you can quickly, in a short period of time, check the airfield, scan everything again. If the weather is good, if visibility is good, you can see everything. The satellite doesn't always see everything on the first pass either. Plus, intelligence spends a lot of time deploying their people in Crimea or even throughout the Russian Federation to analyze what's going on.
Meanwhile, according to the Institute for the Study of War, Russian troops are trying to straighten the front line and advance toward the Dnipropetrovsk region. Such tactics may be aimed at creating a buffer zone.
There is no leveling out. Look, their objective is to reach the city of Pokrovsk through the territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region. That's what I think they're trying to do. As for any kind of leveling out, well, in my opinion, that's just not relevant at all. Deep state shows that the Russian Federation, the gray zone of the Russian Federation, is literally less than 100 meters away from the Dnipropetrovsk region. And for the past few days, the map there hasn't been updated.
In turn, according to the president of Ukraine, today he was briefed by the commander-in-chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, who reported on the situation at the front. Our units in the Sumy region are gradually pushing the occupier back. Our unit in the Sumy region is gradually pushing the occupier back. Thank you. Thank you to every one of our soldiers, sergeants and officers for this result.
To each and every unit, all currently existing and present in the system here and now.
Volodymyr Zelensky also announced new deliveries of air defense systems from Germany.
We are also grateful for the deliveries of Iris-T air defense systems. We now understand the delivery schedule. I won't go into all the details, but the plan is for the next 3 years. And in any case, this is very important assistance for us. This does not mean that the war will last for so many years. We want the war to end. But still, Ukraine, our land, and the safety of our people must be protected.
Zelensky's team responded to the statement by the head of the Pentagon about reducing aid spending for Ukraine. A Zelensky advisor reported that Kyiv is currently considering options to replace critical types of weaponry, including air defense systems.
For half a year now, we've understood that the United States of America will not be helping us. In other words, they have no desire to do so. All we see is more and more cuts and more cuts. The Europeans have realized this. The Europeans have caught on to this moment that, well, nothing will come of it. And for the past 4 months, they've been relying solely on themselves. For us, this is an unpleasant sign, but to say that it's unexpected, that we're terribly surprised, well, that's not the case either. We've been preparing for this as much as we could. The countries of Western Europe do have the finances. For us, it takes some time to manufacture this equipment and these munitions.
While Russia tries to expand the front on the ground, NATO is launching satellites to monitor it from orbit. The alliance intends to track the actions of the Russian army both in the Arctic and on the battlefield. The new space program is already being called part of a containment strategy.
The Europeans are trying to cover what used to depend on the United States of America. For a long time, as we've said, for 75 years, the Europeans were riding on America's back because the Americans had the technology, the manufacturing and the satellites. But the situation with Donald Trump showed that, guys, you need to rely only on yourselves. And the Europeans understand that at any moment the Americans could simply stop sharing satellites, stop providing images of territories that are important to them, or stop sharing intelligence data.
Israel attacked Iran. The first wave of strikes began, primarily targeting nuclear facilities. According to the IDF, high-ranking officers and nuclear scientists may have been killed as a result of the attacks. The Israeli authorities declared the operation a success and stated that the series of strikes would continue for as many days as necessary.
We are facing a long stay on the front lines, much longer than we have been used to so far. I am sure that you are already preparing, stocking up on everything you need: food, supplies, clothing. But most importantly, you must stock up on patience and faith in the righteousness of our path.
In turn, Iran promised a powerful slap in response and launched 100 drones at Israel.
Well then, let's now analyze the operational situation on the much suffering Pokrovsk front. The bloody rampage of the enemy army continues here as well. On the Pokrovsk front, Russian invaders made 32 attempts to push our defenders from their positions in the areas of the settlements of Popov Yar, Mirolyubivka, Shevchenko-Persha, Luch, Udachne, Novoserivka, Orekova, Korovka, Novopavlivka, Andriivka, and Alexeyevka. The defense forces are holding back the onslaught and have repelled 25 enemy attacks. 7 battles are still ongoing. Mines are being laid near the front line, explosives are being dropped into enemy trenches, and food is being delivered to infantry who have been holding their positions for over a month, are the tasks of Ukrainian drone pilots. Previously, all these tasks were carried out by people. Now, under modern wartime conditions, they have been replaced by hexacopters. These are giant drones that defense force pilots mostly operate at night, since they are large and quite noisy. TSN special correspondent Yulia Kirienko witnessed one of the night missions of the pilots from the 24th King Danilo Brigade who fly the Vampire hexacopter in the vicinity of Chasiv Yar. Watch her report next.
High speed, a considerable distance between vehicles, and driving without headlights, these are, quite simply, the typical rules of the road at night around Chasiv Yar, a place where enemy drones now completely and relentlessly rule the skies, making every journey even more perilous and increasingly dangerous. We made it to the positions from where the Vampire operators work. These are the pilots who launch one of the largest hexacopters in the Ukrainian Army, Vampire drone. It delivers a significant amount of explosives directly into Russian trenches with precision, just like that. They use it to mine the area in front of our infantry positions to protect them. Previously this was done by sappers, but now they've been replaced by the Vampire drone. But tonight, the drone crew has a humanitarian mission to deliver food to soldiers on the front line. The sky is relatively clear right now, not far from the front line where we are located. The guys have brought the first package. It contains food for the infantry, so it's very important to deliver it today because the infantry has been in the trenches for a long time, a month or even longer. That's why they constantly need to be fed. And this is done with the help of large hexacopters, in particular a Vampire like the one you see here. The pilots are setting up a tall antenna for communication. It could give away their position because enemy drones are watching them just the same. But without it, our copter won't fly. They connect the starlings and attach a several kilogram box to the drone. The first load has taken to the sky. The huge blades of the Vampire seem to tear through the darkness, and the drone's buzzing is louder than the explosions on the horizon. Because of this sound, the Russians have nicknamed the copter Baba Yaga. The pilot feels the pressure of enemy electronic warfare on the drone. The Russians have activated spoofing. The vampire system continuously warns about this.
Spoofing is when they feed you false GPS coordinates. The drone might think it's actually here, but the GPS shows it over there, and it starts dodging. And every 1.5 to 2 seconds, it changes everything.
In such conditions, in complete darkness, the pilot needs to deliver the cargo precisely into our infantry's trench, because it's undesirable for them to leave their cover. It's an additional risk to reveal their position.
They can't go out and listen. At best, they can listen from their shelter. If they go out, they might not be able to get back in.
The drone approaches the trenches, and the soldiers are already waiting there. There are still 9 boxes left, carefully wrapped in plastic film, and inside they're cushioned with empty plastic bottles so the cargo doesn't break upon landing.
You take it and go. You take it and go one after another. We have a list that we work from: water, ammo, power banks, and everything else they ask for.
Everything needs to be delivered before dawn, so it's safer to leave the outskirts of Chasiv Yar. Summer nights in Donetsk region are too short, just a few hours. That's why no time is wasted here. In an instant, the pilot loses connection with the drone. Now it's impossible to see where to fly. The reason for these obstacles is unknown, but the vampire crew in the underground shelter is starting to get really worried.
Is it not responding? And you don't know where the position is or what? Well, tell him. The video just froze. Our video just froze, and we can't see anything, but the package is already on its way. It's been dropped.
Blindly, the pilots still managed to deliver the cargo. Now the task is to bring the drone back. They'll have to do it by ear, because losing it could be too costly. And it's not about the price of the drone, but about supporting the infantry.
Let them try a bit lower, so I can see it. Let them try to lower it little by little.
Oh no. The mission is practically complete. Ahead lies a difficult journey out of the positions, because dawn is on the horizon, and they need to get out unnoticed by enemy drones before sunrise. That's why the pilot's car and ours race down the night roads toward the first rays of light. For our warriors, this dawn on the front line has arrived.
If you saw the dawn in Donbass, it means you're alive.
Now let's move to the Kramatorsk and Toretsk sectors of the front. The enemy is becoming more ferocious here as well. In the Kramatorsk direction, Ukrainian defenders have repelled 5 enemy attacks near Chasiv Yar, Kurdyumivka, and towards Bilahora. Another battle is still ongoing. In the Toretsk direction, the enemy carried out 14 assault actions in the areas of Toretsk, Ivka, and towards Sherbinivka, Ruziniv Yar, and Yablonevka. One battle is still ongoing. Meanwhile, Putin has become seriously frightened by the now legendary SBU Operation Web. He was so frightened that he decided to hide his strategic aircraft in the farthest east of his country, Kamchatka, Chukotka, and the Amur region. This information is particularly, let's say, interesting considering that Ukraine is already testing its own ballistic missile. It feels like the Kremlin maniac definitely won't be able to keep his aircraft hidden for long. All the details are coming up right now in our analytical report.
I'm not a coward, but I am afraid. While Kremlin propaganda desperately tries to convince the world that the Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian airfields did not cause significant damage to Putin's nuclear triad and Russia's strategic aviation, in reality, the Kremlin is frantically trying to hide what's left of its strategic aviation as securely as possible. After the brilliant special operation by the SBU, Russia relocated its most valuable military aircraft as far from Ukraine as possible to Kamchatka, Chukotka, and the Amur region.
Putin demanded that the planes be hidden. That scarecrow crawled out and demanded that bases and airfields be prepared in advance for new weapon systems, so that, I quote, they aren't placed in the middle of an open field. By the way, what exactly is he planning to prepare these new airfields for? Don't you know? Given the burned aircraft part of that nuclear triad, the air component after Operation Web, pretty soon they'll be able to fit all of them neatly on a single airfield.
And that's not just a figure of speech. In reality, Putin has barely any strategic aviation left that can actually take to the skies. According to the Telegraph, the Russians have relocated at least 2 of these 160 strategic bomber missile carriers 6,500 kilometers away from the front line. They were transferred to the remote Anadyr base. To understand just how remote and isolated this place is, it's enough to know that you can only get there by air or by sea, as satellite images show. The new Old Kremlin Strategic Airfield is located on the uninhabited Chukotka Peninsula, about 660 kilometers from Alaska. It was built back in the Cold War era to protect the USSR from potential attacks by the United States of America. Now, battered SBU aircraft and MiGs are hiding there from Ukrainian drones.
So it turns out that Ukraine, after hearing this statement from Putin, should hide its planes, hide in the wheat, and hide the tanks that are left. In other words, Ukraine has forced Russia to seriously prepare for war across its entire territory.
However, it's not a given that such precautions by Putin will save Russia's strategic aviation. On the contrary, they can play a cruel joke on the unfinished Caucasus. Most of the Kremlin's aircraft fleet is over 40 years old. The service life of these metal birds has long been running out. Due to the lack of modernization and proper maintenance, every flight, especially from a remote airfield, could potentially be the last for the Kremlin's strategic bombers. It's simply impossible to carry out maintenance on the Tu-160s in the backwaters of Russia. In the end, no matter how much the Kremlin's strategic aviation tries to hide in nooks and crannies or at remote bases, sooner or later it will have to return to the zone of direct fire from the Ukrainian Armed Forces.
Well, let's put it this way. The possibilities for ongoing repairs and routine maintenance at the main airfields have already been exhausted. A major overhaul is required. All Russian aircraft repair plants for this type of aircraft are located in Diaghilevo, which has already been hit, and in Taganrog, which is even closer to the front line than Diaghilevo. That's all. Only 2 plants are capable of repairing this type of aircraft. If the Russians transfer them for repairs, well, most likely, especially with the appearance of our missiles, they will have to say goodbye to these aircraft right there if they send them for repairs. And just 2 missiles would be enough to dispel any doubts the Russians might have about the possibility of repairing aircraft there.
A new modern airfield with all the necessary infrastructure could solve this issue. It was precisely this kind of airfield that Putin ordered to be built. But all of this is just talk. In reality, no one is going to build any military base. There is absolutely no point in it. After all, Ukraine could turn it into a pile of twisted concrete at any moment.
Naturally, Putin understands perfectly well that no new airfield for new weapon systems will be built. But of course, the order needs to be given on camera. In other words, he says, new bases, our super powerful, super wonderful ones, with modern weapons, please, make sure to build them with proper protection.
In the end, experts tend to agree that the active redeployment of Russian strategic aviation is nothing more than pointless maneuvers meant for a domestic audience. In this way, Putin is trying to reassure himself and the Russian people who were shocked by the brilliant attack of Ukrainian drones on the airfields. In practice, however, the Russian Air Force suffers much more from this decision than from Ukrainian drones, as they wear out the already extremely limited service life of their equipment. It will become much more difficult and costly for the Russian army to carry out massive airstrikes from such a distance. And if we recall the Kremlin Air Force's tendency for unauthorized jettisoning of munitions from under the wing, it's quite possible that the lion's share of Russian missiles will end up falling somewhere between Moscow and Chukotka.
Now let's discuss in detail the operational situation on the Kupiansk and Lyman fronts. The Russian world continues to destroy, kill and maim here as well. On the Kupiansk front, the Russian occupiers tried 3 times to break through our defenses near the settlement of Stepova-Novoselivka and in the direction of Holubivka and Petropavlivka. On the Lyman front, the invading army carried out 2 attacks on the positions of Ukrainian units near the settlements of Kopanki and Nadezhda. Now, let's talk about how Iran's war against Israel could negatively impact Putin and all his military commanders. First of all, there is a so-called strategic partnership agreement signed between Russia and Iran. And here the question arises, will Putin send his so-called little green men to fight in Iran By the way, Alaudinov is already demanding the mobilization of 1 million Russians. And most importantly, the elimination of Iranian generals by Israel could break the chain through which Iran was supplying Russia with its Shahed drones and their components. We have prepared exclusive details for you.
They struck Tehran, but the repercussions were felt all the way in Moscow. The day before, Israel confirmed the elimination of several high-ranking Iranian military officials as a result of a massive airstrike.
That's epic. Dozens of generals have been sent to hell.
During the night, the intelligence division determined that the top command of the Revolutionary Guard Air Force was gathering in an underground headquarters to prepare for an attack on the state of Israel. Air Force fighter jets attacked the headquarters where the commander of the Revolutionary Guard Air Force was present. Among the eliminated military personnel is Iranian General Amir Ali Hajizadeh. According to Israeli intelligence, he was the one who brought much grief to Ukraine. Hajizadeh was directly involved in supplying Iranian drones and their components to the Kremlin. Some components were still supplied by Iran to the territory of the Russian Federation in order to assemble already finished Shahed models. It is important to understand that such strikes by Israel against Iran can have significant consequences for us. In an instant, Putin lost one of his main tools of terror against Ukrainian cities. No matter how much the Kremlin boasts about import substitution or renames Iranian Shaheds as Russian Gerans, the internal components are still supplied to Moscow from Tehran and only on the personal orders of the eliminated commander of the Islamic Republic's guards.
Indeed, the moment right now is the most favorable. Iran is not in the best situation, not in the best condition after the fall of its proxy regime in neighboring Syria, as well as the strikes that have been carried out against Hamas and Hezbollah, which have also been significantly weakened. And obviously, it is quite possible that Israel will take advantage of the current moment.
Significant infrastructure was destroyed. Missile manufacturing, air defense systems, and much more inside Iran itself. It was Israel that destroyed it, and therefore its military capabilities in terms of striking are greatly weakened.
Military analysts are confident that the Kremlin is already experiencing the negative consequences of the Israeli special operation. Meanwhile, Ukraine will feel the positive effect in the coming days. They are heavily dependent on the supply of certain components, which is why we see varying numbers of launches at night. And it will only get worse from here, especially for Moscow, military experts are sure. Already the day after the elimination of the Iranian generals, Israeli air forces struck a factory producing Shaheds and also bombed a local company that manufactures almost all radar systems in Iran. Now, following the shortage of Shahed components, the Kremlin will also be deprived of most other Iranian weaponry, which Tehran has been supplying to Russia without interruption in recent years.
Let me remind you that Iran supplied Russia not only with Shaheeds, but also with artillery ammunition, man-portable air defense systems, anti-tank systems, and helmets and body armor. A lot of different things were supplied.
The fewer means Iran has to kill Ukrainians, the better. If Israel is the one to make that happen, that's wonderful. If Israel destroys all the entire military potential of Tehran so that as few Ukrainians as possible are killed, that's what I support. It would be great if Israel, using remote methods,
If the F-35 destroys all those factories producing Shaheds, ammunition, shells, components for ballistic missiles, and so on and so forth, then fewer Ukrainians will be killed. What's bad about that? Come on, that's not bad. Come on, it's not bad if Moscow has fewer of these means, even if it's just by 1%. Even if it's just 1%. Well, that 1% could mean one person, and that person won't die in Ukraine. So why can't we approve of the destruction of Iran's military potential?
However, it must be acknowledged that the Russian opposition figure is seriously underestimating the Kremlin's dependence on its allies in Tehran. The cessation of arms supplies to the Kremlin could play a cruel trick on Putin and his army. Without Iranian drones, Putin loses a crucial tool for exerting pressure and terror in Ukraine, while Tehran, in turn, is left without Russian military technologies that Moscow generously shares in exchange for weaponry.
In exchange for the supply of Iranian Shahed drones, which are now being used to strike peaceful Ukrainian cities. Iran receives Su-35 fighter jets from Russia. Russia also apparently may have shared additional technologies, although admittedly much about this remains unclear for now. There are also suspicions that Iran may have supplied Russia with a certain number of ballistic missiles for strikes against Ukraine.
So, with a single strike, the Israeli forces managed to hit two members of the axis of evil on the world map at once. And what is even more important is that, according to the IDF, this is only the beginning of a large-scale operation aimed at undermining both the Iranian and Russian dictatorships.
And now let's talk about the situation on the Pavlivka and Huliapole fronts. Let's be honest, this is yet another sacred objective for Putin and his entire gang. Accordingly, the situation here is also extremely tense. On the Pavlivka front, the enemy tried to break through our defenders' lines in the areas of Novoselka, Volnepol, Boatyr, Bulatsky, and towards Zaporizhia and Shevchenko. Our defense forces successfully repelled 17 enemy assaults. 2 more attacks are still ongoing. On the Huliapole front, our defenders repelled 2 offensive actions by enemy units near Malinivka. Olivske and Huliapole also came under airstrikes. And now another extremely important topic. Ukrainian defenders have managed to liberate the village of Andriivka in the Sumy region from the occupiers. At the same time, the enemy has concentrated a powerful group of more than 50,000 soldiers on the border of the Sumy region. We will tell you what is currently happening at the front, including in the Sumy region. Let's watch.
We are not just holding back the onslaught, but also reclaiming our territories. It became known that the armed forces of Ukraine managed to stabilize the situation in the Sumy direction and even push the enemy back, based on the results of a closed meeting with Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky. In particular, it was revealed that in the Sumy region, the occupiers have concentrated about 53,000 troops who have been continuously assaulting our defensive line for several days. However, despite such efforts, our fighters managed to recapture the settlement of Andriivka from the enemy and carry out successful counter-operations.
We cherish the days for pizza.
As a result of these days, special gratitude is owed to the soldiers of the 225 Separate Assault Regiment. This is specifically for their offensive actions in the border area of the Sumy region and the liberation of Andriivka in particular. Thank you very much, guys. I would like to mention the 425 Separate Assault Regiment for their successful actions in our Pokrovsk direction.
Overall, analysts assess Russia's offensive in the Sumy direction as a continuation of the Kursk operation. By concentrating tens of thousands of soldiers there, the Kremlin sent hundreds of troops to their deaths every day, which eventually produced results. As a result, the tactic was deemed successful, and now these meat-grinder assaults continue as part of the advance deeper into Ukraine.
Back then, the Russians managed to find, in the end, our weak spot, which was logistics. This Sumy-Suji highway was the only lifeline connecting our contingent to the main forces. To cut it off and, under the threat of encirclement, force us to retreat closer to the border. Now, the Russians are mechanically repeating the same tactic, trying though not without some success to cut off our forces in the Sumy region from the main forces by severing the Sumy-Suji highway, and this is already happening on our territory.
However, the occupiers are only able to reach Sumy in propaganda talk shows. In reality, the occupation of the regional center is completely out of the question, according to the military. The Russians simply do not have enough reserves concentrated there for that, but the real objective is to inflict maximum terror on the local population of the city.
The goal of this offensive was to get as close to Sumy as possible so that the city could be shelled with FPV drones and artillery, specifically Cube artillery. Yes, indeed, some Russian figures claimed that they had already gained ability well, as of about the middle of last week, to strike Sumy with FPV drones. They were very pleased about this. But now we see according to the president and the available sources, that the enemy has been pushed back from there.
So how exactly was the situation improved in another hotspot, the direction of Pokrovsk? Our troops are indeed recording minor successes by Russian forces there. However, the results claimed by propagandists are still a long way off.
In the main directions of attack, the pressure continues and the fighting remains extremely fierce and intense. Both in the Pokrovsk direction, between Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka, and to the south of Pokrovsk in the Pavlivka direction, the situation there is very difficult. And also in the Lyman area, essentially where they are having successes. But to say that they can now break through the defenses there and reach operational depth, no, that's not the case. Our forces are countering them and they lack the necessary resources.
The Dnipropetrovsk direction also remains on the agenda. According to the president, the Russians are spreading disinformation here, trying at least to set foot on the administrative border by sending in small sabotage and reconnaissance groups, and from time to time publishing photos claiming that Russia has already reached this area. At the same time, they forget to mention that when these saboteurs return to their units after another information operation, they are regularly eliminated by the armed forces of Ukraine.
That's all for today. But very soon on Front News, there will be new exclusive reports from our journalists in the hottest spots of the war, brought to you so that you know the truth. This was Volodymyr Timoshenko. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.